Oi, 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 oi. Look, I don't want to talk about Keir Starmer. My comfort zone is ranting and raving about the Tories, who have pretty comprehensively wrecked the country, if you hadn't noticed. And under our current electoral system, which I'm about to talk about, we'll either then get a Labour government or a Tory government. I get all that. But I also don't think my criticisms of Keir Starmer are going to swing the next election, lads. I often get criticisms from his deeply boring online army. Ooh, Tory shill, fifth columnist. You love the Tories so much, you want to marry them and have their babies. This is known as Schrodinger's left, which is where the left is so toxic and irrelevant that we can be marginalised and crushed by Starmer, but so powerful that we can swing elections just by the power of our tweets and videos. Now, Starmer made a decision to wage war on the left and tell us to generally go F ourselves. Message heard, loud and clear. But I'm not a press officer for this guy. My job is to tell the truth. I'm a political commentator. That's my job. My view is he's an objectively dishonest politician who appears to believe in essentially nothing other than winning power for the sake of it. Now, what's he been up to today? For a bit of context, if you're not aware, Starmer promised when he was campaigning to become Labour leader that he would, under a Starmer government, there would be nationalisation of utilities. He scrapped that. Higher taxes on the rich. He scrapped that. Abolition of tuition fees. De facto scrapped. Party unity. Don't even get me started on that one. He went to picket lines in the contest and declared that politicians needed to do so, and then banned his shadow cabinet ministers from doing so on pain of being sacked. We could go on. Essentially what he did is offer Corbynism with competence. That was the kind of pitch he kind of put forward, and delivered Blairism without the charisma. Now, today the Byline Times reports that Starmer's official spokesperson has that the Labour leader, this is what his official spokesperson said that Starmer has a long-standing view against proportional representation, and when asked to clarify Starmer is against proportional representation, added yes. He also added he isn't looking to change the electoral system, it's not something that's a priority for him. Oh, really? Just because there was this guy who's also called Keir Starmer, who said very different things when he was standing to become Labour leader in 2020, because he was seeking the votes of Labour members to become Labour leader. During the leadership contest, the Electoral Reform Society, this is their thing, electoral reform, hence the name, issued an excited press release on 31st of January 2020 saying, Keir Starmer announces support for constitutional convention and proportional representation. This is actually quite funny reading back. The Electoral Reform Society, it says, has welcomed an announcement today from Sir Keir Starmer on his support for constitutional convention and electoral reform to repair Britain's broken democratic system. Speaking at an event this morning in central London, the frontrunner in the Labour leadership election announced his support for constitutional convention and the need for a fairer proportional voting system. He said, we do need a constitutional convention. One of the most powerful things coming out of the referendum was the sense people want decisions to be made closer to them and by them. It was a very, very powerful thing. I think that's a very powerful message. It's a socialist message. He doesn't say socialist very often anymore, does he? And it's a Labour message about power coming from bottom up, not top down. He then goes on to say, let's hear his own words.
I also think on electoral reform, we've got to address the fact that millions of people vote in safe seats and they feel their vote doesn't count. And that's got to be addressed. We will never get full participation in our electoral system until we do that at every level. So we need to address that.
The guy's funny. I mean, look, I've decided. Ludicrous, deceitful, but funny. That commitment to completely and utterly taking the piss out of people who voted for you, for treating them like complete idiots, like complete fools, who've been completely done over and having no regret or shame about it. It's kind of funny. When things are this grim, I just let things wash over me. I think the case for electoral reform is inarguable. We have an electoral system, which means that different votes matter more depending on where you live. In some places they don't matter at all. You're in a safe seat, doesn't make any difference. And people are forced to make decisions about who they're going to vote for, not on the basis of who they prefer, but often to keep someone out. So if you're someone who wants, for example, a more left-wing party, but you think to yourself, well, I don't want the Tories to get in, then you often hold your nose and you vote for the Labour Party. It works the other way around, of course. It's not a democratic system, clearly. That's why we need to get rid of it. Now, a lot of Starmer's uncritical cheerleaders justify the constant junking of his promises by going, well, things have changed, COVID, Russia invaded Ukraine. It's obviously total nonsense, by the way, about all the other junked promises. Greater crisis means more radicalism, not less. You don't look at the energy crisis and go, well, we can't. I did support nationalisation of energy, but not now. What? Okay, given what's happened since the pledge was made. But what does COVID in Ukraine have to do with electoral reform? Why would you have to junk that one? Doesn't make any sense what happened, whatever. It's clear what happened. He made a series of commitments he did not mean or believe because he thought Labour members wouldn't vote him in otherwise. And he also thought he'd get away with it because the media hate left-wing Labour members, so they regard the media, his wanton lying to them, as good politics rather than epic deceit. And you know what? His calculation was pretty bang on. I've said it before, and I'll say it again. I regard the man as a con man. Now, it does say a few other things too, which I think are worth investigating, interrogating. You see, the biggest cheerleaders, uncritical cheerleaders of Starmer, are Liberals. There's not a single Liberal cause, though, that Starmer supports. I mean, how gullible, how much Stockholm Syndrome are you suffering from? He backs Boris Johnson's hard Brexit, having in part deceived Labour members with his Remain credentials. He whipped his Labour MPs to back hard Brexit, and then has criticised Rishi Sunak for supposedly backtracking on Brexit. Incredible. He said there's little difference in immigration between Labour and the Tories, despite backing freedom of movement at the leadership contest. He doesn't back civil liberties, having called for tougher crackdowns by the Tory government on environmental protesters, again U-turning on his pre-election stated sympathies with Extinction Rebellion. He's a trenchant supporter of the war on drugs. He doesn't back electoral reform, as noted. You see, there's a phenomenon worth unpicking here, which is how many of the people who call themselves liberals just are not very good liberals at all. They don't champion liberal principles in any meaningful way. It doesn't matter how much Starmer treads on liberalism. They don't say anything and indeed object to anyone pointing out how illiberal he happens to be. And I said it before, but it's difficult not to conclude that for these people, politics is not about substance. It's not about what a Labour government will do. It's about vibes. They kind of think to themselves, well, he kind of seems like one of us. He's not vulgar. What they like the Tories are. The objection like they often have to the Tories isn't actually what the Tories are doing in policy. It's about the fact they're kind of uncouth and embarrassing. And they want the grown-ups back in the room as they see it. Grown-ups who do adverts, using child abuse for cheap political attacks. I mean, it's just vibes, isn't it? It's just vibes. There's no substance there. Now, the same goes for a lot of people who actually call themselves social democrats. A lot of the Labour right-wing MPs, that's their shtick. They call themselves social democrats. Actual social democrats believe in things like hiking taxes on the rich, public investment, expanded public services, expanded welfare state, a mixed economy with public ownership of key natural monopolies. But most of the people calling themselves social democrats don't actually champion any of these things at all. The real consistent liberals and social democrats, that is those who champion traditional liberal and social democratic causes, are actually socialists. That we're the ones who back, say, civil liberties, the rights of migrants and refugees, ending the war on drugs, electoral reform, as well as public ownership, workers' rights, higher taxes on big business and the rich, scrapping student debt, an ambitious public housing programme. We could go on. Those are the things that, an expanded welfare state, public services that are properly invested in. Now, what this tells us is that a Starmer government is not going to solve the massive crises afflicting this country. Got to be honest with you, that's my job. He's got no principles he'll stick by. Anyone who believes otherwise at this point is either a liar or a dupe. I've got to be, look, that's rude. I know that's rude, but you're grown-ups. A lot of you, most of you, not all of my audience, but a lot of you are grown-ups, and you need to be, I think, told how things actually are, not mollycoddled. I don't think you can trust anything he promises. Clearly. And I think he'll bow down to any pressure that comes from the right or the establishment, whatever. It's no surprise his ratings are plummeting. According to YouGov, his approval rating of the last month has plummeted by 13 points. 49% say he's doing badly, up by 7. 31% think he's doing well, down by 6. Those who think he's a Prime Minister in waiting, down 10 points. 51% says he doesn't look like a Prime Minister in waiting, up 6. Those who say he does, down 4. He's had the easiest ride from the media of any Labour leader since Blair. The easiest ride from Labour MPs. And it gets worse. We're in an election campaign. There's local elections coming up next week. He's getting more coverage. He's out campaigning. And yet, the more voters see of him, the worse. His tawdry attack on Rishi Sunak, which is what happens when you don't have a vision. You've got a vacuum, so you fill it with bile and negativity. Doesn't seem to have worked, does it? What's it going to mean in a general election? If this is happening in a local election. What's going to happen there? If people see this guy and they don't like him. Now, his declining ratings aren't down to people like me complaining. I'm actually not God, as it turns out. Turns out my videos and tweets aren't swinging elections. It's on him. and his team. It's on his lack of principle and his lack of vision. Yes, Labour currently has a whopping big polling lead. It has been declining for weeks, from a very high level though. But that's all built on Tory failure, Tory self-destruction. It's not down to Starmer mania, as I keep saying. And that is a problem. Look, as I keep saying, it's my job to tell the truth. I'm a political commentator. I don't work for the Labour Party. I'm not a Labour press officer. I've had my criticisms of all Labour leaders, and I'll continue to make clear where I think they are wrong. But I don't think any Labour leader has been... I mean, they just haven't, this dishonest. I've criticised... Say about Tony Blair. When he became Labour leader, he didn't pretend to be a Bennite in order to get elected. Didn't pretend to be an apostle of Tony Benn. He made clear which direction he was coming from and which direction he was going to. Now, this guy, very, very different. Absolute epic deceit. And he's conned everyone. He's conned Liberals, he's conned Remainers, and he's conned Socialists. And yeah, I get it. Under our electoral system, it's Labour or the Tories. But this is a government in waiting. And unless there's pressure built on the Labour Party from the left, their view is, well, you're in the bag, you lot. We don't need to court your votes. We just need to go after Tories. So we don't need to listen to younger people, to minorities, to people who want a Britain in which the wealthy aren't just treating it as a massive playground, running riot while public services collapse, the rich don't pay their taxes, and workers are deprived of basic rights and young people are saddled with debt. So they just think, well, we don't have to. So I'm going to keep criticising him for that reason, and you should too. Please like and subscribe. Do hit the notification bell, by the way, as well as subscribe. And support us on patreon.com/OwenJones84. I will see you in a bit.